morning. Welcome into our Bible class. We're so glad to have you, and I'm sure we're going to have several more pouring in. 2 Kings 24, we're 2 chapters from our conclusion of our Divided Kings and Kingdoms period. 2 Kings 24, for anyone who would want to make it there and follow along with us. We are saying goodbye to 2 nations and a number of rulers. We're saying goodbye to Assyria. We've kind of already semi-done that. Assyria, who are some of the leaders of Assyria? I'm sorry. Okay, very good. Also known as Tiglath-Pileser II, very good. Snack-on-ribs, right? Sennacherib, he was one of those. And we've also said goodbye as far as oppressors go, where we are today. Egypt. Who's the leader of Egypt? Pharaoh Necho. Very good. That's actually Pharaoh Necho II. We hadn't discussed that. There's a first. So this is Pharaoh Necho II from history. We're saying goodbye to him. However, we're also saying hello to another oppressor. Oh, who's this one who's coming onto the scene? Babylon and its ruler Nebuchadnezzar. Is actually from history Nebuchadnezzar II. There's a first one. We're not talking about him. And his dad will reference. Does anyone know his father? I'm probably pronouncing this incorrectly, but Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar. The Babylonians always have some doozies of names. Nebuchadnezzar. Who's your dad? Nabopolassar. Oh, yes, I know you. So, anyway, we're in 2 Kings 24, and we are beginning some unfortunate oppression by yet another enemy because we, quote unquote, as a country just will not listen to God. And we've had some good rulers. Actually, strangely, at the tail end of Judah's history, a couple of the best kings that Judah had in Hezekiah, and then we have a couple of generations and a really good leader, the boy king, what's his name? Josiah, who takes over when he's 8 years old. But tragically, we've had some terrible, some of the worst, some of the best and some of the worst, all mixed in together here at the bottom end of Judah's history. So we're in verse 1 of 2 Kings 24. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim, in case you're wondering who that his is, that's our new king, Jehoiakim. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his vassal, which is his subject, or kind of slave king. I'll let you stay in place, and your people largely. However, you're going to pay us the taxes that we demand of you. And it's always about money. It's about the bottom line. And as long as you submit to us and we just take in essentially all your resources, we'll let you survive and have a little bit of freedom and be your own people. So that's what a vassal territory and a vassal king is. This takes place for 3 years. But after that, King Jehoiakim turned and rebelled against him. It always happens with tyrant kings in tyrant nations. Look at our own nation's history. Essentially, the 13 original colonies of the United States were a vassal territory to Great Britain. And eventually, what happens? Every time in history, people get fed up with it, and people rebel. And that's what took place even in the history of our own country. So I want to talk just a little bit about this Nebuchadnezzar coming up. And to do that, I'm going to pull up our map for the day. And if you look over in the green shaded area, you're going to see the kingdom of Assyria and some others. And of great significance to us right now to the southeast is Babylon. Babylon. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar, he's going to come up into the territory of Assyria. They're going to absorb and conquer the Assyrian Empire. And there's a major battle that takes place. It's quite historical. The Battle of Carchemish. You ever heard of that one? That occurs approximately 605 BC. And again, this is a major skirmish taking place between, obviously, Babylon versus the Neo, or the new Assyrian Empire. And she's going to conquer her and continue her conquest down to the southwest. But we've been talking some about Pharaoh. Speaking of the southwest, Pharaoh Necho has had a lot of success himself. And you can see the influence in the, what is it, kind of, I don't know if it's grayish, maybe shaded area. And there's some victory that takes place on the part of Pharaoh Necho. Remember, he comes up through Judah. The king of Judah tries to oppose him. He says, come on, man. This is Josiah, the good king, by the way. What are you doing? Your God has sent me up to the northeast. He won't let him pass through the territory, disguises himself in battle, and tragically, the great boy king, after 31 years of reign, is killed at 39 years young. But Egypt comes up to the aid of the Assyrian Empire, and they meet up in Carchemish, and Babylon comes against, and King Nebuchadnezzar wins a major victory against these two allies. I'd ask you, if you will, turn to the book of Jeremiah. This is going to take place a few times today, so if you want to mark in Jeremiah, that might be helpful, unless you just want to get some extra exercise. Jeremiah, the 46th chapter. Jeremiah 46, and we'll begin in verses 1 and 2. This is the reference to the great historical battle of Carchemish. Verse 1, the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning the nations. Now remember, we read last week with Jeremiah being the major prophet on the scene, that he's sent as a prophet to the nations, plural, which is kind of unique in the Old Testament. It doesn't happen a whole lot. You do have Elisha, who goes outside the territory of Israel up to the north in Syria. Of course, you have Jonah, who is sent to the wicked Assyrians. We've already discussed them and the work of that prophet. Jeremiah also is ordained a prophet to the nations, plural. About Egypt, verse 2 of Jeremiah 46, concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates at Carchemish. You can see of the two great rivers in the Fertile Crescent / Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. The Euphrates is the bottom one, as you're looking on a map with the orientation north, and then the one up and over, up and to the right, northeast of it, is the Tigris. The great river, the longer of the two, the Euphrates, and the Battle of Carchemish takes place, as you can see, right on the Euphrates River, in which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. Go down to verse 13. The word that the Lord spoke to Jeremiah the prophet about the coming of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to strike the king of Egypt. And I'd like to go down from there, and we're going to read in verses 25 and 26. The Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, said, Behold, I am bringing punishment upon Ammon of Thebes, that's in the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh and Egypt and her gods and her kings, upon Pharaoh and those who trust in him. I will deliver them into the hand of those who seek their life, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his officers. Afterward, Egypt shall be inhabited as in the days of old, declares the Lord, but not before a punishment comes on this land for her sins. So Jeremiah is sent as a prophet not only to Judah, but as well to the surrounding areas. He gives prophecies about all these kingdoms in the area. Okay, so returning to 2 Kings 24, again, if you want to keep your spot in Jeremiah, it might be helpful. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up. That is, he came up in elevation. Water travels to its lowest point, and this is a lower area, but he travels up into the mountains, and he's going to be going down into Judah. When this takes place, Jehoiakim becomes his slave subject as a ruler for 3 years. But then he turned, and he rebelled against him. Something I'd like to do is to point out these different times that people from Judah are carried away. I'm going to place up a chart for that. I think it's going to be helpful. That'll give dates as well as scriptures and numbers that are listed in them, and then some really important figures that we know, at least by name, from the Bible and when they're carried off into captivity. But to do this, I'd like to read just from a couple of these. Daniel chapter 1, let's read from there. Daniel 1, to open this book, verses 1 and 2. Daniel 1, 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So you see, we're talking about this period of which we're reading in 2 Kings right now. It's in the 3rd year of our reign. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, comes up to Jerusalem and he besieges it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. Our memory verse will deal with that. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So this is the first deportation of the people of God to the land of Babylon as slaves. You have 605 BC. A lot of times you'll hear that as 606, and as I often tell you, there's a lot of, like a year or two wiggle room in some of these dates that could throw them off by about a year. But they're pretty accurate from history that we know. I was taught more 606 BC. That may be what it is. 605, 606 BC. Roughly 9 years later, 597 BC, and there's a second great carrying away. The first one, Daniel and his friends. Who are they? Okay, they are called princes, perhaps eunuchs. Right, Daniel might be one of those also. Make a lot of sense. So here's the key, though. You can't tell me by their Chaldean names. You have to tell me by their Hebrew names. Who are they? Oh, that's so. There's this god Nebo. All right, and these guys are named after the Chaldean gods, renamed. Their true names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Very good, nice. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And there's a reason, excuse me, they're given these new names. They're all plays and kind of mockeries off of what their original names were. And so instead of Yahweh, this positive thing, it's this positive thing, but Nebo, the false god. And they're all named after him. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, so Daniel and his three friends, about 10 years later, some important people are Ezekiel and our next king down the line. We haven't gotten to him yet, Jehoiakim. And it's always been helpful for me to remember the way the order goes of Jehoiakim is alphabetical. M becomes before N. So Jehoiakim is first, Jehoiakim is after. And then, about 10 years after that, maybe more like 11, our final king, Zedekiah, is going to be taken off. We'll talk about the history pertaining to that more so next week. Okay, so these are the three major carrying aways. Doesn't mean it's the only time people were taken out of Judah, and as you can tell, we have scriptural backing as well for the 582 date. There's actually another one, and there may be some other minor ones also, but these are the three major carrying aways, 605, 606, 597, and 586 BC. What we're reading about is the early one, when Daniel and his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are carried away. All right, so let's turn to a parallel of this, Second Chronicles, not Corinthians, Second Chronicles, chapter 36. This is going to be in the last chapter of the Chronicles. Second Chronicles 36, verses 5 and 6. Jehoiakim, where we are, was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in chains to take him to Babylon. This isn't immediately when he starts ruling. As we read back in 2 Kings 24, and we're going to be returning there now. As we read back in 2 Kings 24, King Jehoiakim, he takes over, and then eventually it's Nebuchadnezzar from the northeast who comes down, and he subjects him, and he's going to allow him to stay as the ruler and in that land and let the people largely stay. It's just, you got to do what we say, and you pay us the price that we name to you on an annual basis. And that works out pretty well for Nebuchadnezzar, the tyrant, and the Babylonian nut jobs for 3 years. But after a while, people get tired of tyrant rulers. They get tired of being told what they do. And it's always happened in the history of the world, and it always will. There will be a rebellion and an all-out war from that. So the rebellion is what takes place in Judah. Back in 2 Kings 24. By the way, the rebellion occurs in 601 BC. 601 BC. Verse 2, and the Lord sent against him raiding bands of Chaldeans, bands of Syrians. And what I'm going to do is go back to our maps so you can see the places of which we're talking, although our regulars know them pretty well by now. So sins against Judah and Jerusalem, not only the Babylonians, from the Chaldeans is another name for those, if you haven't picked up on that yet, over from the basically due east territory, about 600 miles away, and also those from just above them to the north, bands of Moabites, which we don't have. That's going to be on the east side of the Jordan River, though, even though it's not listed on the map. The same with the people of Ammon. He sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken by his servants, the prophets. And we're going to do this a decent amount. I ask you to go back to Jeremiah. If you've marked that, I know it's going to be more helpful. And if you haven't, go ahead and mark Jeremiah. We're going to notice a few of these cross-references that will help us to understand exactly what's taking place. Jeremiah 35, in the 11th verse. We're told, but when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against the land, we said, come, and let us go to Jerusalem, for fear of the army of the Chaldeans, and the army of those to the north, the Syrians. So, Jeremiah says, we are living in Jerusalem. So everyone comes together. Why do you think everyone funnels together in the city of Jerusalem? Why not just stay out where you are throughout the territory of Judah? You might be able to run a little bit more, possibly even hide better. There you go. It's very impressive, the wall structure. Think Jericho, all right, there's a reason everybody goes inside and shuts the gates and all that. It's at least a place where you can hole up. Now, the downside to that is you got all your eggs in one basket. And if there's ever a way that you can break through, not real great. But there's some safety and some time in the very least that can be bought. So that's probably what people are thinking. Hey, let's gather in from all these small areas all throughout. And all that's left, essentially, of the mighty nation of Judah is a city. It's sad, isn't it? How the mighty have fallen. Verse number 3 of 2 Kings 24. Surely at the command of the Lord, this came upon Judah to remove them from his sight. Why? Largely because of the sins of the guy who was penitent. Give him credit for that, Manasseh. But many times when we're done with our sins and we seek the forgiveness of God and his graciousness, he grants it to us. Our sins aren't done with us. Meaning that there are lingering consequences physically from the sins, even though God so generously has removed us from the spiritual consequences of those sins. And that's the case with Manasseh. And also because of the innocent blood that he had shed. This is a big one. If you say, well, there are lots of kings of Judah that were wicked. Yeah, this one's a little bit different, though. Lots of innocent blood that was shed in the land. And remember all the way back in the beginning, Abel and Cain. Of course, it's Cain who rises up and kills his brother Abel. What does God say about the innocent blood to the surviving brother? Your blood, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. What's it crying out? Justice. Justice. Blood is a life force. And when it's unlawfully taken, the life of another, then that life force cries out to the giver of life, give me justice. And God will not rest until that justice is granted. It's why it's so important. I mean, a lot of things are significant, but it's so relevant, so necessary that we protect innocent blood, because that blood cries out from the ground to God, and eventually justice will be given when the time is right. So I ask of you, we're not going to turn and remember, because I think we recalled this pretty well for those who have been here. What innocent blood was Manasseh responsible for shedding? A few different categories here. Okay, children. How? Why would you just kill children? That's weird. Why was he killing children or having them killed? For sacrifice to gods that didn't even exist. It was all for nothing. But that's what he did. Whose kids did he have killed? Well, there are probably a number of them, but we know from his personal choice, his own. He sacrificed his own children. The innocent blood of children crying out to the ground, from the ground to God, give us justice. Who else's innocent blood was crying out from the ground? He was responsible for some persecution. Of whom? The prophets of God, and one very prominent one, the one who was sent on a special mission, the Messianic prophet. Yeah, we're not told this directly in Scripture, but from history, the record is that Manasseh was responsible for the execution of Isaiah, the prophet, and that he was sawn in two as he was hiding out and running from his persecution, as he was hiding out inside of this hollowed tree. And that might be the reference in Hebrews 11 when it mentions in the hall of faith, some were sawn in two. That could be, and there might be others also, but it might be a specific reference to the prophet Isaiah. The point of which is this: there's innocent blood that he's shed, the innocent blood of God's prophets, the innocent blood of little children, and there has to be an answer for that. Because of his turn, again, give him credit, because of his repentance, God doesn't do it during his days, but eventually the judgment has to come. Verse 5, now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim, a few generations down the line, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Sure, we've read a little bit of that, and we'll see some more cross-references as we move on. So Jehoiakim rested with his fathers. Then Jehoiakim, notice I doubt they did it for this reason, but the alphabetical following here. Okay, M is the dad, N is the boy. Alphabetical order. So Jehoiakim rested with his fathers, then Jehoiakim his son reigned in his place. There's some of these dates that we know very pointedly, and this is one of those from the historical records, that this is December 9th, 598. That's very exact. But December 9th, 598 BC. And we're really just not told a whole lot about Jehoiakim's 11-year reign. But if you don't mind, I would like to go to Jeremiah 22, where we're given more information from the guy who dealt with this gentleman on a regular basis. So tell us, Jeremiah, what kind of a guy was Jehoiakim? What did the Lord think of him? Well, here's a prophecy involving the king. 22 of Jeremiah, verse 18. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. They shall not lament for him, saying, oh, my brother, or ah, sister. They shall not lament for him, saying, ah, Lord, or ah, his majesty. In fact, here's how they're going to treat him at his decease. With the burial of a donkey, he shall be buried, dragged and dumped beyond the gates of Jerusalem. Go up to Lebanon and cry out, and lift up your voice in Bashan. Cry out from Abarim, for all your lovers are destroyed. I spoke to you in your prosperity, probably living in Dad's glory. This is old money, I think, here, from the glory days of his dad, Josiah. I spoke to you in your prosperity, but you said, I will not listen. This has been your way from your youth. Your heart's always been like this toward me. That you have not obeyed my voice. The wind shall shepherd all your shepherds, and your lovers shall go into captivity. Then you will be ashamed and confounded because of all your evil. O inhabitant of Lebanon, nested among the cedars, how you will be pitied when pangs come upon you. Pain as of a woman in labor. So even though we don't have a whole lot of idea of specifics of Jehoiakim's reign, that's the kind of guy he was. Now, does it make sense why God defers judgment from penitent Manasseh, and then it can come on the days of the people and the king Josiah? Doesn't do it then. Why does he not do it in that generation? What do we know about King Josiah? Okay, his heart had turned to God. What else? He was a great king. So you see how God works? He always knows when the right time is to give punishment. By the way, Jesus in Matthew 23 mentions, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And then he says, "On this generation shall come all the innocent blood of the prophets crying out to God from the ground." Why does he wait till that generation to do it? Because it's the most evil generation, arguably, among, and all this pending judgment has been building and is going to be unleashed on that generation. Well, it's the same thing right here. It doesn't come during the reign of Manasseh, even though he's a terribly evil king. The people were wicked because God knew his heart, and he knew he would change. At some point, maybe at the end of his life, might be earlier, we don't know for sure. He knew he would change. So now Josiah, he's going to get it. Now it keeps being rolled forward, and this is a generation that's going to get it because this is a wicked king and a wicked people that are very deserving. All right, so let's go back to our text of 2 Kings 24. We just read verse 6, so we'll pick up in number 7. And the king of Egypt did not come out of his land anymore. Now look, we know where Egypt is on the map. The Egyptian king, Pharaoh Necho II, he's been meandering all around, especially up to the northeast, and he doesn't go up northeast anymore. And why do you think that's the case? What happened about 7 years prior? The Battle of Carchemish. He joined forces with the Assyrians, and they were whooped by the Babylonians. And this conquering king, by the way, I didn't mention this, but at the time the Battle of Carchemish takes place in 605 BC, even though Nebuchadnezzar is the field general in that battle, he's not the king of Babylon. Or at least not a sovereign one. He might have been a co-ruler at that time, but it's still his dad, Nabopolassar. But he's dispatched his son as the commander of the armed forces, and man, he's building his momentum and winning all these victories for dad, and eventually the kingdom's going to be turned over to him. The king of Egypt, he wasn't able to come out of his land anymore because the commander, Nebuchadnezzar, leading the Babylonian forces, comes down through Judah, and he goes there to the border of Egypt. For all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates, had been taken from him by the king of Babylon. All right, so the brook of Egypt, there's some different ideas on this. It's widely thought the brook of Egypt, there we go. The brook of Egypt, do you see this as you go straight up? There's a little crook. Okay, this is not the Nile River. A brook is a creek. Trust me, the Nile is not a creek. We're not talking about that. That's the river of Egypt. That's not the brook of Egypt. And the brook of Egypt was named as it was there on the Sinai Peninsula that juts out because that served as the northeastern border of Egypt as far as like the official state territory for a number of years. Now some believe this brook is one that comes up from the Gulf of Suez. You have the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea arm, and then the Gulf of Suez. And you see those lakes, and they're the bitter lakes that the Israelites encounter and all that. Well, there's a lot of water in that area, and some think it's a stream, a small one that goes right up there. So it's either that one or it's this one that comes out about in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. But whichever it is, the king of Egypt stays at home. Necho's not leaving Egypt any longer, going on all these trips, because he knows what's on the other side. And that's Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, and he doesn't want to have to encounter them and have more people taken away from him. Well, this takes us through the reign of Jehoiakim. Now let's talk more about his son. Alphabetical N comes after M, and so you have Jehoiakim. Verse 8, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. We won't turn and read, but the parallel to this, 2 Chronicles 36, verse 9, says, well, technically it's 3 months and 10 days. The one rounds it to 3 months, and the other one gives the exact number, even into 10 days. His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. What kind of a king is he? Go figure. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Jehoiakim had done. I ask you to make a repeat visit with me to Jeremiah 22. Jeremiah 22. I told you we don't know a lot about Jehoiakim's reign, but let's go to the prophet's work, who dealt with him on a regular basis. Well, we don't know just a whole lot about Jehoiakim's reign, but we can read from the writings of the major prophet working at that time, Jeremiah, and he's glad to share more information about him. Jeremiah 22, we stopped reading about Jehoiakim and the prophecy made against him in verse 23, so let's just pick up right below that, verse 24. As I live, declares the Lord, though Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim, a lot of these guys have multiple names. And that's the case with Jehoiakim. Coniah is his other name, or Jeconiah. Though Coniah, Jehoiakim, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were the signet ring of my right hand, yet I would tear you off and give you into the hand of those who seek your life, into the hand of those of whom you are afraid. Everyone was at that time. Even into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of the Chaldeans. I will hurl you and the mother who bore you into another country, where you were not born, and there you shall die. But to the land to which they will long to return, there shall be no return. Is this man Coniah, or Jeconiah, or Jehoiakim, a despised broken pot, a vessel no one cares for? Why are he and his children hurled and cast into a land that they do not know? O land, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, write this man down as childless, a man who shall not succeed in his days, for none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on the throne of David and ruling in Judah any longer. If we have more time, I would show you in the genealogy of Jesus why this is a really significant prophecy, and also understanding future events and potentially even end of the world kind of things. We don't have time for that, but it would be really fascinating if we did. Okay, so 2 Kings 24, verse 9. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. A little more detail found in Jeremiah's penmanship, according to all his dad Jehoiakim had done. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against the city as his servants were besieging it. Then Jehoiakim, king of Judah, his mother, his servants, his princes, and his officers went out to the king of Babylon. And the king of Babylon, in the 8th year of his reign, took him prisoner. This is another one historically we know quite pinpointedly. This is March 16th, 597 BC. March 16th, 597 BC. Now think about what we just read compared to the prophecy. Why are all these details, you think, given? So Jehoiakim is taken and carried off to a foreign territory in Babylon. And not only him, but also all of his servants, all of his princes, all of his family, even his mother. That's the exact prophecy that we read in Jeremiah's utterances that's recorded for us. And that's why I think all of these details are important. So God makes not only him pay, but everyone who's connected to him, even the mama who gave birth to this rotten young man. Okay, so who would like to tell us what King Nebuchadnezzar does at this point? He's king of Babylon now. Remember, we're what are we? I just told you that was 597, 605. So we're 8, depending on how you count them in time of year, 9 years separated from the Battle of Carchemish when he's not king, or at least not sovereign king yet. He's a field general. But by this point, he's ruling Babylon. So who would like to tell us in verse 13 what he does in the land of Judah when he conquers it? King Nebuchadnezzar. 2 Kings 24:13. Yes, sir. God promised, didn't he? It's coming. It's coming. It's coming on this land. It's coming on the holy city, the place in which the hope of all Jewish people resided. The temple, when all things were ruckus. Well, at least we have the temple and the beauty of it, and it's gold, and you don't have it anymore. It's all gone. Now, this goes back to a conversation we had a little bit ago. What do we know was found? What key piece in which the Israelites had really trusted in their history? What's the furniture? The Ark of the Covenant. It's never specifically mentioned, but one of two things would have happened here. Either the Ark of the Covenant would have been carried off and melted down into gold to be used just like all the other articles, or there's a rumor back from history that it was actually hidden and buried underneath the temple. And then we got some Indiana Jones stuff, we don't know for sure, but this much we do know. It disappears not only from history, but as well, it disappears permanently from Scripture until we start reading about it again in the New Testament, but it's symbolic by that point, right? Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've wondered the same things, And again, if you watched Indiana Jones, people paid, didn't they, when they started messing with that? You know, if it were still around and unearthed, would it still be the same thing today? I don't know. It's a fascinating consideration for sure. Yeah. But those are the two main possibilities behind it. We're not directly told what happened, so I'm content to say it could be either one. I don't have the last reference, but it seems to be. We recently encountered it. Someone has some kind of electronic search you can do quickly on that if you don't care. Maybe before the end of class. Good question, we can get that. But it seems like it was within the last few classes, I think there was a reference to it, Marty. But check me on that to make sure. And if we don't get it by the end of class, I will before our next meeting. But anyway, here recently is the last time we read it. We never read about it again from this point forward. But it makes perfect sense. If all, that's what we're told, the wording is all the articles of gold. It's part of the articles of gold. It was overlaid. If it was still there, would have been carried off and like the others, cut in pieces, melted down probably for its gold value, unless it were hidden, and it remains hidden to this day. Verse number 14. Also he carried into captivity all Jerusalem, all the captains, and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. So I want to go back to our chart when these 10,000 are taken and all these people of skilled labor. Again, that's right around the year 597, maybe give or take a year, BC. Ezekiel and the king, as we read earlier, are also carried off in this time. None remained except the poorest people of the land. Now, why do you think King Nebuchadnezzar would carry off all the goldsmiths and all the princes, the eunuchs, all the royal family, and he leaves behind the poor subjects? Why do you think he would do that? Paul? That makes a lot of sense. The people with the smarts and the training to rebuild it, they're not there, so it's not going to happen, right? The only way that could possibly happen is if they were to come back into the land. Keep that in mind for the future, okay? Number one. Number two, these are the people with a little more training, probably have some more skills for life. Think you might have some use for them over in Babylon? They're going to become slaves of the king, probably helping to bolster the Babylonian army and probably the gods of the false gods of the temples that exist over there. And so these people who are back behind, and please don't take this as my viewpoint, but probably from the kings, they would be seen as the ones that are of less value than the others. Now, they're just more mouths to feed. It's probably the way he's looking at that. We wouldn't certainly. Every human being is equal importance to one another, but of course that's not the way this oppressor, this tyrant would see it. Please, go ahead.
Jeremiah 52:16, but Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen.
Okay. And
I think they were left behind to take care of them.
Right, sure. Yeah, the lowest peasants, yeah, so the land doesn't become too overgrown. Yeah, it makes sense as well. Thank you. Verse 15, and he carried Jehoiakim captive to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officers, and the mighty of the land he carried into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. All the valiant men, 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths, 1,000, all who were strong and fit for war, these the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Again, these are going to be more useful for the king. Now, with a little bit of time that we have remaining, we're going to cross over into the last 4 verses of the chapter. Then the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Wonder why he would change his name. No, really, I wonder why he would change his name. I looked up the meaning of these, and the gift of one, Mattaniah, is gift of Yahweh, and Zedekiah means Yahweh is strong. So it's kind of interesting that Nebuchadnezzar gives a lot of pagan names honoring his gods to these eunuchs and other helpers in the palace like Daniel and his friends. But to this king, he keeps the name of Yahweh on him The first one is gift of Yahweh. That's his birth name. But his Chaldean given name is Yahweh is righteous. Reason behind that? Your guess is as good as mine. But I think of the one, he might have been seen as a real asset to God and his people, or at least that's the prediction given by people perhaps in Mattaniah. Gift of Yahweh. And then the Chaldean king says, we're going to call you Yahweh is righteous. He may mean by that the God of your people has judged his people properly or given these people what they deserve. Maybe what he has in mind. Could be something else also. So in verses 18 through 20, we're going to finish up just this little section. The demise of Judah. We'll begin it and we'll finish it next week. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. It would appear to be a different Jeremiah with whom we're familiar at this point. He also did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that Jehoiakim had done. Time we have. We probably don't have time to read more about this. If you're interested, though, some more details of his reign and how wicked he was, 2 Chronicles 36, 11 through 16. 2 Chronicles 36, 11 through 16. Final verse. For because of the anger of the Lord, this happened in Jerusalem and Judah, that he finally cast them out from his presence. Then Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. What do you know? People and their rulers do not like to be oppressed by tyrants. You always see it. Even to this day, third world dictatorships, the people eventually rise up and they overthrow their dictator. Think of Gaddafi for years in Libya. You know, eventually it comes. It always takes place all around the world. Fidel Castro. Anyway, it's time again we see in history. Yeah, very good, John. You're exactly right. Works both ways. Okay, so this happened to God's people. He finally cast them out from his presence. 594 BC, Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. You know, he always kind of cuts a little slack. This is a self-appointed guy, and it's mentioned in the prophetic writings that he made him swear by God, his own God, we will not deviate. We will not rise up against you. And then we're told in the prophets that he made a visit down to the southwest to the ambassadors of Egypt. Said, hey, what do you think about us getting together? And well, the king of Babylon finds out about that, and that's the end of King Zedekiah. And we'll talk more, though, about King Zedekiah and his rebellion next week. This rebellion takes place in 588 BC. Perhaps Zedekiah has the mentality, you know, if we stick together and with others, if we band together, that we have a chance to beat this. Makes me think of Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers and signers of the Declaration of Independence. And Mr. Franklin, when he's a part of the Continental Congress and he's talking about what needs to be done on that fateful day, and he ends up putting his signature on that, could very well produce his death. He gives some famous words to his fellows of that Congress. This is what he tells them. We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately. The only hope we have of not hanging is to hang together. And I think that's probably what Zedekiah has in mind here. As a people, and maybe of other nations too, we all need to band together, because if we hang together, maybe we shall not hang at all when it's said and done. Is the country of Judah going to hang? Is Zedekiah going to hang? We'll find out next week in 2 Kings 25. In preparation for that, please do read the 30 verses of that chapter, the final one of 2 Kings chapter 25, and let's memorize what Hezekiah has to face, the final sight that he'll ever perceive in verse 7 of 2 Kings 25. Any other comments, though, through today's discussion? Yes, ma'am. That is, Karen, for sure. Yeah. And of course, in the case of David, a lot of his, it wasn't innocent, the blood that he shed. Some of it was, for which he was responsible. And in part, I think at times there are some different intentions also behind. And give David credit, he wasn't sacrificing kids to false gods. That's a plus. But unfortunately, he was responsible for the sacrifice of thousands of soldiers of his for no reason at all, but just selfish, sinful reasons. Yeah, good point. I hadn't thought about that. Thanks, Karen. Anything else?
Makes you wonder if Nebuchadnezzar appeared to be.
Right. Yeah, grasping at straws, probably. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Okay, that's all then. Thank you.